Hello everyone, in this video we're going to build a full stack authentication app with React, GraphQL, and Auth0. So what's going to happen is we're going to have a to-do list where you are not going to be able to add to-dos unless you are logged in, but you are going to be able to view them publicly, whether you're logged in or not. And then also the login functionality will happen on the front end, and we will also keep track of the authentication status on the back end. So once you are logged in, you will be able to add to-dos. You'll also be able to have a custom redirect. So in this example, I've redirected the user to bro I like pie once they've logged in. And you'll be able to track the authentication status and the user information both on the front end and in the server. So we're able to get the current user's information on the server and whether or not they are authenticated, both front end and back end. So full stack. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Please subscribe to this channel for more coding tutorials, like the video, and leave a comment. Also check out the source code in the description for the complete and working version of this project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a new directory and I'm going to call it a full stack auth0 GQL. And then I'm going to change into that directory and we're going to make a server and then npx create react app and UI. And then we're going to open up a new folder. And I'm going to go back to that directory because we're going to need two terminals. So desktop and where was it? Full stack. Okay. And then we're going to build out the server. So cd server and code dot to open up the server folder. Okay. So that's open. And I'm going to make an index.js file. And then we're just going to do some initial setup first. So I'm going to say const Apollo server GQL require Apollo server. You're going to need to know some basic GraphQL. We're not going to go over that too much. So const type defs equals GQL. We're just going to build a super basic server for our schema. So we're going to have a to-do with a title and a string and an ID. And then we're going to have a query for the to-dos and then a mutation. So type query to-dos to-do. So get the list of to-dos and then a mutation to create the to-dos. And if you need help with GraphQL, I have some other beginner GraphQL tutorials, so be sure to check those out. So title string to-do. So basically we're just making a mutation that creates a new to-do when it gets called. And I think that's it for the type defs. So we'll have server now to create our Apollo server. And we're going to pass in the type defs and the resolvers, which don't exist yet. So let's create the resolver. But let's go ahead and make a listening. Let's turn the server on first. So server.listen URL. Okay, so that basically just turns the server on, and we'll need to create our resolvers. So let's import them. And they don't exist yet, but we're going to make them in an src folder. So const resolvers equals require src and resolvers. Okay, so this is where we're gonna define our basically our functions that get and change data. So new folder src and resolvers.js And then in here, we can say const resolvers equals, and then query and to-dos, which matches our schema. So parent args context info, and then we're gonna return to-dos, and then mutation, create to-do, parent args context info, and create the to-do here. And so we're just using, we're going to just use a hard-coded database here. So module.exports equals resolvers. This way we can import this from in the index file. So now we need to set up a basic database. And so we're just going to use a hard-coded like array kind of thing. So I'm going to say const db, which will be our database, and we'll put it in the models folder. And so let's go ahead and make a models folder in our src. So models.js, I meant models file, sorry. And then we'll say, well, we're also going to need some data. So let's make a data file. So this will be where our array is of to-dos. So const data equals to-dos, and then we'll have objects, and these objects are going to be to-do objects, and they're going to match the schema, this type to-do. So they're going to have a title and an ID. So data.js will have ID of 1, title of hello, and then ID of 2, title of I like pie. Okay, and then module.exports equals data. So we're exporting this from this data file so we can import it in the models. Okay, so now our models, we're just going to say, we're going to import the data. So const data equals require data, and then const, we're going to make a function called get to-dos, which gets the to-dos. So get to-dos equals, and we're going to give it an optional filter parameter. And we're going to say if there's no filter, just return all the to-dos. Otherwise, data.todos.filter, and then we're going to filter with the filter. So we're just basically going to filter out the to-dos based on the filter parameter. So we can get only specific to-dos, but we're actually not going to do that in this tutorial, so there's no point in having that. Anyway, not a big deal. We need another function to add the to-dos. So const add to-do equals, and in order to add, we need arguments. So new ID will just be the length of the array, and then const to-do to add equals the new ID for the ID, and then title, which is passed in from the client. So title args.title, so that should be good, and then we just add it to the array. So data.todos.push to-do to add. Okay, and then we'll return it to-do to add, and we're returning because we need to return something from the resolver, the mutation, which we'll use in a minute. So anyway, return to-do to add, and then we're going to export these functions. So const db equals get to-dos and add to-do, and then module.exports equals db. Okay, so we do that, and then we have the database that with the functions that we can use. Oh, what happened here? Add to do, oh, capitalize. Okay, so we're exporting this, and then we can import it in the resolvers, and then we can use db.addToDo and db.getToDos to add and query for our to-dos. So now here in the resolvers, we'll just say todos is going to return db.getTodos. All right, and then create to do is going to, it's going to return db.add to do, and we take in an argument that was passed in from the client, and we pass it into this add to do function, which is again going to add the to do, and we just return it. So I think that's it for our resolvers. We can save that and then go back to our index file, and then we have already imported it, and so we should have a basic working server. So let's give it a try. We'll save all this, and then, oh, we need to install things. So I'm going to install Apollo server. Excuse the mistake here. I need to npm init -y to create the package.json file. And then I think I'm just going to install everything at once. So npm install. I think we need Apollo server, and then .env for our environment variables. And then I think jwks-rsa and JSON web token, I think. So I may have added some unnecessary packages, but we'll get those installed. Okay, those are installed, and then let's add a quick script. So start, and we'll do nodemon index.js. Okay, save, and then we can just run npm start. So npm start on the server, and hopefully we'll have a basic GraphQL server running. Okay, so I said server ready on localhost 4000. So if we go localhost 4000 and then /GraphQL, because this is Apollo, we can hit query the server, and let's try to make a basic query. So we'll go query, and we made a query called todos. You can check that out in the schema. So ID and title is what we'll return from it. So we're just testing out the server real quick to make sure it works. And so we get hello and I like pie, which are our to-dos. Let's add another one just to make sure the mutation works. So mutation to do. And this mutation takes a title argument, which is of type string. And we're going to make the create, well, we're going to use the create to do. I don't know why it does that. I don't want create to do title 2. I just want it called title. And then this can go away. Okay, so we have a named mutation called to do, and the actual to do mutation resolver is create to do, which is defined in our resolvers. So resolvers create to do, that's where it is. So we need, and we can get back a title and an ID. And so yeah, we're running that mutation. And then we need a title parameter. So down here in this variables section, we'll call it title. So this is essentially acting as our client. So title, hello there. You should already know basic GraphQL if you're following this. So anyway, we're gonna hit go, and we've created the to-do. So if we go back to our queries, we'll get hello there. So our GraphQL, our basic GraphQL server is working, and this is a good checkpoint. So I'm gonna make a commit so you can get to here if you need to. And we're gonna work on the front end now. So I'm going to close out the server, and we need the front end also. So I might as well just close this out. And let's open up the entire project. So full stack auth0 GQL. We got our server and our UI. And so this will be where our repository is. So I'm going to do this off screen or quickly. Okay, so all I did there was I moved the React apps get ignore to the parent directory, so it's sharing the server and the UI folder, so we can have a single repository with the UI and the server. And then I adjusted the get ignore lines, and then added node modules and a .env for both of them. So that's pretty much all I did there. And now we can start on the UI. So again, if you get stuck, just feel free to check out the branch in the repository that's provided. So anyway, we are in the, well, let's go ahead and cd into the UI, and then npm, well, we're going to need to npm install, and we're going to need to install at apollo/client, and we're going to be using auth0, so we're going to need auth0/auth0-react, and then we're going to need GraphQL and React router-dom, and they just came out with React Router 6 as I'm doing this video, or recently, so make sure you're using React Router 6. Okay, so once those are installing, or while those are installing, we can go back to our server, and we'll make sure that we're in our server directory and our server is running. So npm start in the server, and then we'll start the UI as soon as this is done. Okay, so the UI is done. Let's npm start that. And our front end is working, but we need to set up the queries and mutations to the server. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so let's head over to our UI's src index.js file, and we'll start here with GraphQL, or specifically Apollo. We have a Apollo provider wrapper that we need to wrap our app around so the entire app can access the queries and mutations. And we're going to do some stuff with useEffect and authentication, so we're going to make our own enhanced Apollo provider, and we're just going to wrap our app with that instead. So basically what this is going to look like for now, it's going to say import Apollo wrapper from /Apollo wrapper. And this is our own Apollo wrapper, so we can just go ahead and make this. So I'm going to hit save. Well, it's going to give me an error because it doesn't exist. So let's create this Apollo wrapper in our src. So Apollo wrapper.js. And then in here, we're basically just going to return Apollo provider. So I'm going to say import Apollo client in memory cache, HTTP link, and Apollo provider from at Apollo client. And then we're going to import React, use state, and use effect. I don't think we need that yet, but I already started on it. So now we're going to make our Apollo wrapper function. So function Apollo wrapper, and then we're going to grab the children because this is going to wrap our app. So our app is going to be this children. So what we need right now is we just need the HTTP link equals a new HTTP link URI and HTTP localhost 4000. And so this is basically just saying, okay, this front end is going to connect to this app API right here. So this localhost 4000 is our server. So we're just saying, this is how we connect to our server. So from here, we can create an Apollo client, new Apollo client, and this is going to add where our cache is going to be. So cache new in memory cache, which is where Apollo handles all of the cached information for performance and all that stuff. And then we also need the link, which is going to basically be HTTP link for now. And so we're basically just saying, you know, here's the server. So don't want to get too far into that because it's going to be a long video. So return Apollo provider client equals and client. Okay. And then we're going to wrap children with Apollo provider, and then export default Apollo wrapper. Okay, and so because of the way we have this set up, we can see that we're exporting this. So this Apollo provider needs some children. So we're going to save that, and then we're going to wrap our app with Apollo wrapper. So Apollo wrapper. And so basically what we just did here is we connected the front end to the back end, the UI to the server here with the in-memory cache that Apollo is using. And then that gives our app access to all the queries and mutations on the server. So we should be able to, oh, I need to capitalize this C here. Okay, so now we should be able to run queries and mutations in our app. So let's go ahead and do that with some just basic mutations and queries. So here in our app, we're going to say, we're going to make our query. So export const todos underscore query equals GQL, and query todos underscore query todos title and ID. So this is just the query that we ran earlier in that Apollo Studio where we got the existing todos. So we're basically just doing that on the front end. So we have our todos query here, and now we can run this query to display the todos. So I'm going to say const data loading error equals use query and todos underscore query. And so we're just running this query basically. And because we're using this use query, we need to import it. So import use query. And we're also using GQL. So from @Apollo client. Okay, and so this should be enough to get us our data. So let's run if loading, because this is an asynchronous query. So if the todos are loading, we just want to return a div that says loading. Okay, and then after this, the data should either exist or there should be an error or something. So let's let's display a list of todos. I'm going to get rid of those. I'm going to get rid of this image. And so I'm going to say UL. And you can console log data to make sure your data is coming in properly, but I'm just going to do data.todos.map to-do. We're going to return all of our to-dos. We're going to pass in to the to-do component a to-do.id and an ID of to-do.id and a title of to-do.title. Okay. And so that's our list of to-dos, but we don't have a to-do component. So let's import the to-do component, to-do from to-do. Okay, so now we need to make this to-do component. So src to-do.js. And then we're just going to say function to-do, ID title, so our ID of the to-do and our title of the to-do is title. So export default to-do, save. Okay, and now we are getting our to-dos from our server. And so then if we add another to-do, hit go, and then go back to our front end, refresh, and we should get 3. So hopefully you can get to this point, and I think we have our front end set up, so I'll do another commit and another branch, so you can check it out if you need help getting here. Okay, before we work on any sort of auth, let's first set up the mutations as well. So inside of our app.js, we're gonna want to add an add to-do component. So I'm gonna say import add to-do from to-do, and then we're basically just gonna import or put that maybe underneath or above, right above our UL. So add to-do. Okay, because we want to be able to add to-dos without authentication, but so we can see the differences. So we have this add to-do component that we need to make, and that will be here in our src add to-do. Oops, and I think I want to make this add to-do. Okay, and then now add to-do.js here, and we're basically going to say import React, use state from React, and import use mutation in GQL from Apollo client, and then we are going to export this create underscore to-do query or mutation. So this is going to basically be what we did in that Apollo Studio. So mutation titles of type string and create to-do with an argument or a parameter of title. And we're just going to get back the title. Well, you can get back the ID as well. And that's our mutation. So we need to use it now. So function add to do, and we're gonna set the state of title equals use state, and then const create to do and error. This is just typical GraphQL mutations and using Apollo. So use mutation, create to do, which is this guy here, or girl. And we're gonna, oh, you know what? I'm gonna wait on these on completed and on error because there's one thing I wanna show you about those. And so we actually don't, wait, do we need this? Yeah, so refetch queries. So after this, and I'm going on hyperspeed here for this because the goal of this is to talk about authentication. So refetch queries, query to-dos underscore query, and that you can see that imported it automatically for me. So after this mutation runs, we're going to refetch the to-dos query. And there's better ways to do that, like caching, but we're not going to worry about that right now. So anyway, now that we have that done, we can make a function inside of this add to do component. We're going to call it add new to do. And this is where we're going to run our create to do mutation. So create to do, and it's going to take in variables because we need to know what the to-do's title is. So we have one variable of title. So we're basically just creating that to do. And then we need to call this when the user has filled out the form and then press the button. So we're going to say return, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do. And then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and then we're going to say return to do, and div, and then we're just going to do a super basic text field with the value of title, and on change handler equals running the set state function, or the set title function in this case. So e.target.value, which is the target, the value of the input field. So just like that. And then underneath here, we should have a button. So button on click equals add new to do. And we'll call this button submit. And then I think that should be good. Okay, and then we need to export. Export default, add to do. And I need to capitalize this. Okay, and we're not using the error yet. We will get to that in a moment. So we'll hit save. And then now we have our form here, and we should be able to add new to-dos. So if I hit submit, there we go, it refetches. So we're good, and let's do another commit and another branch for this point. Okay, so 30 minutes to get set up. Now we can finally start talking about authentication. So we can do just front-end authentication, and in fact, when I first got started with Auth0, that's what I did. For a couple months, I just used the front end to authenticate everything. And so eventually you'll run into situations where you need authentication to be handled on the back end as well. So how do you get the authentication to get passed into the back end? Well, let's first cover just the front end. So let's just close everything out and start from scratch. So in our index.js, we need to wrap the entire application with the Auth0 provider. That way we can test for, whether the user is authenticated, throughout the entire app. So what that's going to look like is basically importing Auth0 provider, but we're going to do some other things to it. So we're going to want to add history, the history object to it. And that means we're going to have to wrap it with our own kind of parent wrapper thing. So what that's going to look like is import Auth0 provider with history from, and then we're going to make an auth folder, and then we're going to put the component in there. So auth0 provider with history. And then we're basically just going to wrap our entire app with this. So auth0 provider with history. And then we'll wrap Apollo wrapper with it. So this, we're going to need to create this, and we could just wrap it with auth provider now, but I want to save a little bit of time. So, and it's not really that big of a deal, so because I'm going to keep it basic. But anyway, let's go to our auth folder. So auth, we'll have to make an auth folder, and then we're going to call it auth0 provider with history.js. Okay, and then inside of this auth provider 0 with history, or auth0, we can import the auth provider. So import auth0 provider from @auth0/auth0 react. And then we're basically just going to create this component. So auth0 provider with history equals, and because we are wrapping this Apollo wrapper component, this is basically a child of this auth0 provider with history. So when you see children, just think Apollo wrapper. So here we go, children. And then we're going to just keep it simple for now. So we're just going to return basically an auth0 provider. And then inside of this auth0 provider, we also have, we have the children that auth0 provider with history is wrapping. So this is where we're going to put the Apollo wrapper. So children here. And then lastly, we'll need to export default auth0 provider with history. And then from here, we need to create our application and then pass in, I think it's the client ID and the domain as a minimum, and then redirect URL. So that's the minimum setup for this auth0 provider. So we need to go to auth0's website and create our app. So we'll open a new tab, go auth0, and then we can log in. All right, and then in the sidebar, we'll go to applications, and there's applications which are for the front end, and then the APIs which are for the server kind of apps, like Node.js apps or something. So applications, and then I'm going to hit create application, and then we're gonna name it. I'm also gonna select React web application, and then I'm gonna call this full stack GQL UI. Hit create. I mean, you can always change this name later. Okay, and then I'm just gonna go to settings, and then we have the name, and then your domain and client ID. And then there's a bunch of different settings that we can set up here in the settings, and we have things like allowed callback URL and a bunch of other things. And so, you know, which URLs you can log out from, etc. And so you can just kind of read these descriptions, but basically what I'm going to do for now is just put HTTP localhost 3000 inside of the logout URL, the allowed callback URL, the allowed web origins, and then I think that's all we need for now. But you can always, you know, just read these and do some research and add them when you need to. I'm gonna hit those, just keep those for now, and hit save changes. And it takes 30 seconds. So we did that. I think that's all we need from here, other than our domain and client ID. So once we have this set up, we can go back to our code and we can start adding the environment variables. So let's create our SRC. I'm not sorry, not SRC, but in the UI, a .env file. And then in this env file, we need react underscore app underscore auth0 underscore domain, and then equals, and we'll go get our domain. But before that, let's get our react underscore app auth0 underscore client underscore ID. So we have our auth0 client ID and our auth0 domain. So now let's go back to the browser and we'll copy the domain, which is shared amongst all of the applications that you build in auth0. So auth0 domain, and then the client ID. So I'm gonna find the client ID and copy that and paste it in here. Save the env file, and then we need to restart the front end. So anytime you update vars, you need to restart the client. Applies to the server as well. But so that is started or restarted. So we can close out the env file for now, and then we need to go back to our auth0 provider with history, and we need to make sure that the domain and the client ID are added to this auth0 provider, because right now it's just going to be like not working. So let's just add them, and I'm going to say up here, I'll just say const domain equals process.env.react underscore app underscore auth0 underscore domain, and const client ID equals process.env.react underscore app auth0 client ID. Okay, so we have those, and then now we can add those to the auth0 provider. So domain equals domain, and client ID equals client ID. And so if we save that now, it's still not going to work. So if I refresh, oh, we have to add a login button now because we want to try to log in. So if we go to our app.js and import use auth0, we can pull out the login and the login with redirect and that is authenticated and stuff like that. So I'm going to say import use auth0 from at auth0 / auth0 - react. Okay, and then down here in the app we can pull from the use auth0 hook. So we'll just say const is loading is authenticated, oops, and then login with redirect is a function that helps you log in and redirect, and then the user object and a logout function. And you get all of that from use auth0. And I'm going to console.log the user as well. So console.log user and user, so we can see what the value of the user object is and make sure that we're getting it. And then now we want to also make sure that we're actually logging in or able to log in. So let's create a button. And this button is going to be right at the top of the inside of the header. And we'll just say if the user is authenticated, then we'll give them a button that allows them to log out. And if the user is not authenticated, then we'll give them a button. Oops, what happened? Oh, did I? Okay, let's change that to straight bracket, or curly, not curly, but parentheses. Okay, so log in. So if the user is authenticated, then display a logout button, and if they are already logged out, then display a login button. And we're going to use this login with redirect function when the user clicks on the login button. So in this login button, we're going to say on a click equals, and then we're just going to say login with redirect, which will log in the user. And we'll set up the redirect a little bit later. So save, and then let's give it a try. So let's go over here, and we have our login button now because we are not authenticated. And if you click login, oh, that's interesting. I always thought it was supposed to give you an error because we don't have the redirect URI, but I guess it is working. So we'll hit accept. Oh, okay, I get an error. Okay, that's why. So yeah, we need a redirect. So I'm going to put after this client ID, I'm going to say redirect URI, and then window.location.origin. I'm going to get rid of these parentheses here. Oops, and I'm going to add these curly brackets. Okay, so we have our domain, our client ID, and our redirect URI. So what URL does the user go to when they are done logging in from this URL here? So we'll go back to localhost 3000. We hit login. Oh no, what's going on? Okay, so there's at least one problem going on here, and I'm going to fix another potential issue also that may be a confusing point. So you want to go back to the application details. If you followed along with what I did something incorrect, and that was I accidentally set a regular web application when we're using a React application. And so basically when you switch to a single page application, changing from regular to single page, we'll disable the client credentials. Okay, we'll hit confirm. And I don't honestly know what the issue is with this. I've read about it and something about client credentials, and it just doesn't make sense to me. But it's not that, well, I mean, you don't get that warning when you actually, like when we created the app and we originally chose like a regular web application or single page, it doesn't give you that error when you, or that warning when you select single page. So I don't know, but either way, we'll pick a single page application, and then that will allow us to, you know, get things to work. So single page application, this will change this token endpoint to none. I'll hit save, and hopefully I'll update the blog post when I figure out what's going on with that or what that warning is about. So check the post. And then the second thing is this user management. I'm going to make sure that we have 0 users. You may or may not want to do this, but I'm just going to delete all of the users just to make sure that there's no, that we're all starting on the same page. So user management, users, and then click and delete the users. Okay, and then now that we set that to single page application, we should be able to refresh. And well, let's get rid of this URL and then hit Control F5 to like maybe reset any sort of cache or whatever. And then I'll hit the login button. Or you could do that in an incognito browser, and then we get taken to this login and sign up page. So I'm going to create an account. And a password, and I'm going to sign up. Hit accept. And hopefully it looks like it logged me in because we have this logout button. And then if I hit refresh, it's going to switch back to login real quick while it's loading, and then it'll switch to logout. So it looks like we have some basic authentication working. If I right click and inspect, hit console.log, and we can see the user is undefined until the loading is finished, and then it gets the user object, and we can see the user object. So we have basic authentication done with Auth0. The problem though is that we don't have a way to send error, like handle errors or like authentication related things on the server. So we're stuck with only dealing with the front end. Like the server has no idea if we're logged in or not. So if I wanted to make sure that the user was logged in, I would have to go like to the app, and then you could do something like with this is authenticated Boolean. So maybe above the add to do form, I could add is authenticated, and then a message depending on whether or not you're is authenticated or you're logged in or not, or you could, you know, hide the add to do form. So, I mean, you kind of have to work around things. It's a lot better to have the ability to handle authentication errors on the server. So let's figure out how to actually do that now. And while we're on this login page, let's just take care of this logout function by handling this on-click handler for this logout button, and we'll just use this logout function here. So log out. That way the user can log out. So we should save that, and then the user should be able to log out and log back in. But we'll try that in a few minutes. So let's go ahead and head over to the Apollo wrapper file. And we're going to go here. And what we need to do is send the token back to the server. And so we need to get the token from auth0. And so we're going to import is authenticated and get access token silently from use auth0. So we can say import use auth0 from auth0 / auth0 react, and then we can pull the property and the function from it. So we'll say const is authenticated and get access token silently equals use auth0. Okay, and then we should be able to get the token now from auth0. And once we get that token, we're going to store it in state. So we'll store it in bearer token. So const bearer token, and then we'll set bearer token and it'll just by default be an empty string if the bearer token doesn't exist. And so what we're going to do now is inside of a use effect, we're going to make this get token function, and then we're going to set the bearer token inside of that function. So we'll say use effect and then we'll say const get token will be the name of the function, and it'll be asynchronous. And then we're going to say const token is equal to a ternary. So if the user is authenticated, then we will get access token silently. Otherwise, the token will be an empty string. So if the user is logged in, then get the token and store it in token, otherwise empty string. And then we will set the bearer token to this token value. And then we need to call this function. So after this curly bracket, we'll say get token, which we'll call it. And then we'll run the use effect anytime one of these values changes. So get access token silently and is authenticated. So at this point, we should be setting bearer token if we're logged in and not setting bearer token if we're not logged in. So we can test that by just doing a console.log bearer token. Don't mind the misspelling. So we'll save that, and then we can inspect and do a right click, and okay, so we get bearer token nothing, and then bearer token nothing, and then when you are logged in, bearer token is equal to this this token. So we have that, and now I just need to be able to send it to the server. So we're going to use a function by Apollo client, and it's called set context. And so we're going to import that. So up at the top, we'll say import set context from at Apollo client /link/context. And then we'll use it down here. So I'm going to say auth link. We're going to store this in auth link. And we're going to say set context equals, and then it takes this function takes two parameters. So the set context takes a function as a parameter with two arguments. And the first argument is the GraphQL request being executed. And the second one is the previous context. And instead of doing that, we're just going to destructure the headers. And then we'll store everything else in this rest parameter. So just like that. And then basically this is going to return, I think it's an Apollo link or an auth link. So let's just return an empty object for now. And then console.log auth link, and we'll refresh and see what we get. Apollo link. Yeah, so it's always going to return an Apollo link. And you can check out the documentation for Apollo link. They've got this big like overview kind of thing to take a look at. But anyway, what we want to do is we want to return something different if the bearer token does not exist. So we're going to say if not bearer token, then return the headers and everything else in an object. And then if the object, or if the bearer token is, if the user is logged in and they have the bearer token, then we can return everything else out here, but we're going to add in a headers object with the previous headers, and then we're going to add in our authorization. So authorization here, and then we're going to pass our bearer token. So bearer colon and then bearer token. So this sets the context. And then what we can do from here is we can actually access this on the server via the context. But before we can do that, we have to add this to the link chain. And so it talks about this in the Apollo link overview, basically that any sort of graph modification to the GraphQL operation needs to be added in this link chain. And so the long story short is we can concatenate it here in this link. So what that looks like is auth link.concat and then HTTP link. So now if we save this, we should be able to access this bearer token here on the server because we've set it up in our context, and that's handled via Apollo. But let's go check out the server. So server src index, and then here we will check out what is in our context now, or we're going to run this like context function. So, or we're going to set it. So we're going to set the context equal to this function, which takes request and response. And then we can console.log the headers. So we're going to say headers auth, and we're going to take a look at what's in the request. So rec.headers.authorization. And if we save this, and then let's look at our server. So let's first make sure that we're logged in. So I've got that saved. Refresh. Okay, and we see bearer token, and mine is CSWGIK something something. And then if I look here on the server logs, we can see headers auth undefined, undefined, and then CSWGIK. So we can see that we are getting our token on the server from the client. So that means we can now verify and make sure that the user is authorized on the server. And so we're going to be doing all of that in the context. And we're going to start out with the user not authenticated, and then if they pass all the tests, then we will make them authenticated. So we're going to start with let is authenticated equals false. And if the user is not authenticated, then they don't really exist, so the user will be null. And then what we want to do is try to authenticate. So we'll have a try and a catch. And we can just console.log an error, or you can console.error. Okay, and then inside of this try, we are going to get the authorization. So this rec.headers.authorization, and we're going to store it in a const called auth0. So okay, and then it might fail because there might not be an authorization, and so if it's not there, then we'll set it to an empty string. Okay, and then so if the auth header exists, then we want to get only the actual token and not the bearer space part. So we're just going to say const token equals auth header dot split, and split by the space. And then this will end up getting the token and storing it in this token const. And so if the token exists, then we need to verify it to make sure that the user is authorized to do whatever they're going to do. So we can say const payload equals await, and then we can verify that this token is valid. And so we're going to pass this token into a verify token function, which we haven't made yet. And then we can start building out our verify token function. So we're going to do that in src utils. So src and then utils, and then a verify token function or file, verify token.js. And then in here we can build out the verify token function. So we're going to need two files, or we're going to need two programs. So JWT from JSON Web Token, and then JWKS RSA. Then we're going to store that in JWKS client. Okay, and then we are going to use some environment variables. So require.env.config. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and create the verify token function. So const verify token equals, and we're going to make it async. We're going to take in the bearer token. And then I am going to copy and paste essentially from the JSON Web Token page. If you check out their documentation, they have an example for using JWKS-RSA, and I'm just going to basically copy and paste this, but update the vars and stuff. So var can be let or const, etc. So that's where I got this information. I am not a cryptography expert. I just kind of take this stuff for granted. So let's go ahead and write it out. And then at the very end, we module.exports the verify token. Okay, so now I can pretend to know what I'm talking about, but basically it seems like in order to prevent unnecessary requests, HTTP requests to the JWKS, they cache the information, and I'm pretty sure that the client is what allows it to be cached. So we create this and we just give it the URL for where the JWKS file is. I don't know if this is the actual signing key, but I know it's important. And instead of using the example URL, which is Sandrino, if you look at Auth0, here is the URL for that. So we can swap that out. And then we're basically just following this example, only instead of using let and vars, we're using const. And we do that. So we have this all the way down to here, and then we modify it slightly here because here they're not using a promise, but here we are returning a promise, which basically has the same information in here, but we're just doing this because we have this being awaited. So I think that should be everything. And then lastly, with the options here for the jwt.verify, we add our options, which are described here. So we have the issuer, and I think the audience, and then the algorithm. So, and we already have those stored in environment variables, and then we're just using the RS-256. So hopefully that helps. I know that is, I can obviously learn more about this, but I think this will suffice for now. So anyway, if you need help with this, you can copy and paste this from the GitHub repo or check out the documentation. So we can now go back to our index.js file, and we need to import this verify token now. So we'll go up here and we'll say const verify token equals require src/utils/verify token. And then this should work. And then so let's do a console.log on the payload to see what we get. So I'm going to save that, and then we can refresh, and you can log in if you need to. But once you do that, we should get some information, and I'm getting JWT is malformed. And the reason I'm getting that is because we need to add in the environment variables that I forgot to add in. So we have auth0 domain and audience. And so the auth0 domain we already have. So let's go ahead and add a new file, .env, and then inside of your auth0 dashboard, so manage.auth0.com, you can go to applications, and then applications. You can pick pretty much any one because it's going to be the same domain for each one. So I'm going to hit copy, and then I'm going to add auth0 _ domain equals, and then this domain. And then we do need an audience as well. And so this is for the application or the API. So we need to actually create an API for the server side auth0 related stuff, I guess. So APIs here, we can create an API, and I'm going to call this full stack -GQL, stands for GraphQL, and then API. Oops, and this goes here actually. So https:// full stack -GQL -API, and then I'll just call it full stack GQL API. So that's the name, and then here's the identifier. This does not have to be unique apparently, so I don't know why they do it this way, but that's just how they do it. And so I'm just going to name it this and hit create. Okay, and then if I look at the settings, we can see this is the identifier, and it is used as the audience. So I'm going to hit copy, and then go over here, paste it here, save, and then we need to refresh our server. So I'm going to hit Control-C, yes, and then npm start to start it back up. Okay, and then now hopefully we can make this work. So we hit refresh, and I am apparently still getting malformed. And the reason for this malformed error is because we actually need to go back to our app.js file, and then we need to add in the audience. So the audience needs to be, or the front end needs to be aware of the audience as well. And so we're going to do that, I'm sorry, not in the app.js, but in the auth0 provider with history. we have our const client ID, and then underneath that we can put in our audience. So const audience equals, and then process.env.react underscore app underscore auth0 underscore audience. And then we need to make this environment variable. So copy that, and then we're going to put that in the UI environment variable. So React app auth0 underscore audience equals, and then this is going to equal the same thing as the server one, which is this HTTPS full stack GQL-API. So I'm going to copy that and then paste it over here in this to be the value of this environment variable. And then over in the auth0 provider with history, we're going to use this audience in this auth0 provider. So we're going to say audience equals audience. Save. And then now we need to refresh our server, our UI. So let's just close these down and start them back up. Okay, and then, okay, so I'm on the server, and so if I, oops. Okay, the app is still starting. Okay, so now that might have done that. Okay, here we go. So we get a payload. So this payload is working, and we get our bearer token. So the payload here shows that things appear to be working. So we can confidently say that the user is authenticated. And so I'll be honest, I'm not totally sure the entire motivation behind why this audience needs to be here on the front end, but the way that I kind of see it in my head is just that it's a way to connect the front end and the back end together. So we need to be they need to be aware of each other, I guess. That's just kind of how I see it, and I am happy with that at this point. But anyway, this video is getting long, so let's continue on. So the next thing we want to do is tell the context in the server that the user is authenticated. So over here in the index.js server, we can say, okay, we have this payload, so the user is authenticated. So we have this let is authenticated as false. We can change it to true if this payload is valid. So we'll say is authenticated equals, and then payload true, otherwise false. So just a ternary that says if this payload comes back, then we can say the user is authenticated. And so then we can store this is authenticated in the context. So again, here is this context function. So we can return an object that is the context. And so we've got all of the everything else, and let's actually change this to rest just to be, doing what everybody else does. And then the request object, and then you can make a separate auth object, so we can store our auth related context info in this auth object. So is authenticated, which is going to be true, and then we can also store the token as well, which we will need a little later. So I'm actually going to say token equals auth header, and then I'm going to say let token up here. So, and then we're actually going to not do user. Sorry about that. We're going to do it in a different way, unfortunately. So auth is authenticated, and then we do have this token. So let's store the token in the context as well. Token. Okay, so we have our token and our auth, and so now we should be able to hopefully require the user to be logged in on the server as well. So we can throw an error on the server if the user is not logged in. All right, so let's give it a try. Let's try to create a user, but we actually have to go back to our resolvers, which are over here. So src, server, src, resolvers, and then inside this mutation, we should have whether the user is authenticated or not available in the context. So what we can do is we can say if not context.auth.is authenticated, then we can throw new authentication error and say must be logged in. Okay, and then we can import the authentication error. So const authentication error equals require Apollo server. So we can save that, and then we can try to create a to-do when we are not logged in. So, okay, so it says, oh, well, we got to log out first. And also let's capture that error. So let's go back to our code editor, and what we're going to do is inside of our add todo.js on the front end, we're going to capture. So this, if the user is not authenticated, it's going to throw an authentication error, which is going to be captured on the front end or the client, and it's going to have an error message. So we're going to log that error message. So inside UI src add todo, we already have this error message. So like if there's an error, we're pulling it out here from our mutation, but we're not doing anything with it. So let's go down here under our button, and then we'll say error and p style of red, and then we'll log the error.message, and I think that's it. So basically what's happening here is if this error exists, then we print out a paragraph tag with a color of red that displays the error.message that is given to us by use mutation, which is running the create to do mutation in the GraphQL server. So we have our create to do mutation here, which throws the authentication error. So this is the error that we're printing out if it exists. So we'll save this, and then now let's head back over to our front end, and we'll try to add a to-do, and it says you must be logged in because this is the error that we sent from the server to the client. So resolvers must be logged in. So we have a complete error handling now, and we are able to determine whether the user is authenticated or not. So we're almost done. The one thing that we have left to do that's optional, and I'm going to go ahead and close all these out to kind of get some space. So what we have is, well, let's do the server. So on the server, we are not able to get the actual user information. And so we need a way, well, you don't always need a way to do that, but if for whatever reason you want to get like the user ID, and so you can automatically grab the user's info, or whatever to-dos are on there that are associated with that user, you want to have some sort of unique identifying information for the user. And unfortunately, I'm used to session-based, where you can just pull it out of the token or the session. And I think I'm still getting used to this, but I think there's a couple ways to do this. And so basically we ended up with this access token here, or this token, and we can use this to query an endpoint on our domain. And so our domain is this, well, my domain is this. So if you look at the documentation for Auth0, there is an endpoint that it looks like this, userinfo. And so when you're authenticated, you can call this endpoint and get the user's information that you've been granted access to. So if you look at our payload, And this is, I can refer you to another video that I learned all of this off of. It was from like Okta, but they have this scope in this payload, and this kind of gives you a sense of what your application is permitted to access from the user. So we get OpenID, profile, and email. And so what we need to do is call that userinfo endpoint to get the user's email address or whatever unique identifying information we're able to get. So we need to go basically call a REST endpoint called userinfo. And so the way that we do that is, I need to close out the UI. The way that we do that is by going to our index file, and we basically have to import an Apollo data source REST package, and this allows us to get basically HTTP requests using like REST. So what we're going to do is we're going to say const REST data source. And there may be some other ways to do this. I've been reading about an ID token, which apparently has some user info in it, but I don't actually know how to do that yet. I haven't investigated that far enough, but this way it seems to work. So we'll stick with this for now. So require Apollo data source hyphen REST. Okay, and then what we need to do is install that package. So I'm going to save it. I'm going to close down the server, npm install apollo data source rest. Okay, and then we can start the server back up. Okay, so that is starting. And what we need to do is we basically need to make a class, and we can set up our GET request in there. So I'm going to say class auth0 API, and then it extends the REST data source. And then we have a constructor, and we're just going to do some basic OOP kind of. So let's see here. We are going to get the .base URL, and we're going to set it equal to our domain. So because we want to run this this user info request on our domain. So https colon and then process.env.auth0 underscore domain, and then a slash at the end. Okay, so we have our base URL, and then we need to basically get the information. So I'm going to make a method called async get info, and it's going to basically try to call an endpoint on this base URL. So I'm going to say try, and then const response equals await this.get, and we're going to say user info. And I'm kind of not a huge fan. I think if you really wanted to fine tune your requests, you could make your own endpoints. You may have to switch to Apollo Server Express. I'm not sure. I haven't played around with that too much, but this should work. So what's going to happen here is it's going to basically say get this and then slash user info. So that's basically how this is going to work. So this is going to be a get request, and then here's going to be the response. And so we can return this response, and let's just give it a console.log just to see what we get. Hello in get info. Response is response. Okay, and then if we have a try, we need to have a catch block, which will get us an error. I'm going to say get info error, and then we'll return this error. Okay, and then we should be able to use this method on this auth0 API class. So we need to store this in our data sources. So down here, underneath or above context, we can say data sources, and this will be a function. And we're basically just going to return this auth0 API, which is going to have the value of a new auth0 API class or instance. So let's also hit a comma here so we can fix the syntax errors. Okay, so now we have access to this auth0 API, and these data sources are available in the context. And so if you needed to connect to a MySQL database that's outside of this server, you could do so here. So just like how we did here, we're basically connecting to this data source. So you can connect to any data source like this. So we have our auth0 API, and now we can use this in our resolvers. So what we want to do now is, if we want to get the user, we would have to call this getInfo function or method. And so let's go to the resolvers and give it a try. So right now here, our to-dos, well, I guess this would be more useful in a create to-do, but I'm going to be a little bit lazy. So let's say you wanted to add the ID of the current authenticated user automatically on the server without having to pass it in from the client. Well, you can do that by just getting the current user now, or the current user's info, directly on the server. So here in this to-dos function, or this to-dos resolver, which gets ran every time we refresh the client, the React page, let's pull in the current user. So we're going to say let current user equals, and then await, and we have access to that data source in our context now. So we're going to say context.datasources.auth0api.getInfo. And so now we can console.log the current user from the query to-dos resolver, and we're going to say current user. So now I'm going to save, and then I'm going to go back to, and I need to make this async. Async, save. Okay, so now let's refresh this page, and then go over here. And we get current user from query to-dos resolver is an unauthorized. And so the reason we get this is because this /userinfo route or endpoint is restricted. You have to pass in an authorization to prove that you're allowed to access that info. And so the way that we do that is basically what it wants is the token. So it wants to have the verified access token that you would use. And if you are verified, then it will give you the information. So basically what we need to do is we need to add the authorization to this GET request. And so the way that we do that is inside of a will send request method. And you can look at the Apollo data source REST documentation for more information on how all that works. But basically this will send request just intercepts the request. So what we're going to do is we're going to say will send request, and then we can console.log just to make sure that it's working. So in will send request, if you would like, and then we can say request.headers.set authorization, and then the bearer and the token. And the REST data source has access to the context, so that's why we stored the token in the context. So we can just access this token and then get the authorization to the userinfo endpoint. So this dot context dot auth dot token. Okay, so this should fix the unauthorized issue that we were experiencing earlier. So let's refresh this homepage. And oh, whoops. Okay, we're not even logged in, so that's another part of probably why we didn't get the information, but what I just said was still true. So let's Johnny Curry 1232. We'll hit login. Okay, and then now that it's refreshed, it's already ran this query to get all the to-dos. And so now if we look over here, we see we've got this current user from query to-dos resolver. We get the sub, the nickname, name, email, and whether the email is verified or not. So that is all of the user information, and then you could use that to get data from your Mongo database or MySQL or whatever you need to do. So that's pretty much it. Actually, there's one more thing, and that's the redirecting on the user on login. So if you go to the client side, src and app.js, we have this login with redirect. And so you can actually choose where the user redirects to on login. And so what we need to do to get that is send in an app state. So you can do something like this. App state, and then this can be an object with something like target URL. And so I'm not sure if the app state is required, but I know for sure that you can rename this to whatever you want. So I chose target URL, and then let's say you want the user to redirect to bro, I like pie at the end. So we'll hit save, and it's not going to redirect yet because you have to actually tell it to navigate there. And so that's what the auth provider with history is all about. So if you take a look at this, then we can make an on to redirect callback. So what we have is an on redirect callback, and then we can just make a function. So I'm going to call it on redirect callback, and then we can create that function. So const on redirect callback equals, and then here's the app state, and then you can console.log the app state, but basically what we want to do is navigate to the app state.target URL if it exists. Otherwise, we just take them back to where they were. So window.location.pathname. And so this is going to, after the redirect is complete, it's going to navigate the user to wherever you've specified with that specific login button. So let's hit save, and then, navigate. We have to define navigate. So import use navigate from React router DOM. Okay, and then let's see here. The next step is saying let navigate equals use navigate. And then we have this navigate function here. So we'll hit save. And then now let's give it a try. So I'm already logged in. Uh-oh, I think I may have an error. Okay, that was a React router error, so I think we need to wrap the Auth0 provider with history in a browser router, I think. So let's import browser router, from React-router-DOM, and then let's wrap the Auth0 provider with history. With that, whoa, what happened? Save. Okay, and then let's give it a try again. Okay, so I'm gonna hit login. And I'm now logged in. I have the logout button, I have my to-dos, and you can see that I've been routed to Bro I Like Pie. So that's kind of cool. You can customize these buttons to route you wherever you want on the logging in. So I think that's it for this video. Hopefully, I know that was super long, but hopefully that was helpful. Thank you for watching the video. Please subscribe to our channel and click the bell to be notified when we release new tutorials. Also be sure to like the video and leave a comment to let us know what you think. Lastly, check out the link or links in the description. We usually create a blog post to go with the tutorial, and we might have a newsletter or course or something to check out as well. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.